Let's give these guys some names. Let's call the friend witnessing this with me Zach, and the one being possessed, Dylan. It all started with me and Zach in the basement at Dylan's house. We were hanging out whilst Dylan was getting ready to go outside and check out the trampoline. He suddenly stands and stares at me and Zach and the top of the steps with a blank face for about 2 minutes. We were calling out his name and he just simply wasn't responding. Once he snaps out of it, he says nothing and we call him over and tell him what just happened. And he turns out having no recollection of what happened. We didn't think of it too terribly much at the time. Maybe he just blanked out or something. After all, he's a pretty weird dude. We decided to go to Zach's place. On the way to Zach's place, we all have a dark feeling in the car, as if someone else was in the car with us. Once we get to Zach's, we all hang out downstairs. Dylan is getting a really bad headache and feels super tired. Me and Zach start to feel very uncomfortable, as if there was something very dark there, watching us and bringing us down. So we go upstairs to chill out. I want to go downstairs to grab my blanket to sleep up there with him. Up comes one of the scariest moments within this haunting experience. So as I went to exit the room to go downstairs, I suddenly ran into Dylan. He's standing at the doorway. The look which he gave still haunts me, and I still have a difficult time explaining the look. His head was angled down, with his eyes looking directly into my eyes, and to my soul. He had a demonic smile with angry eyes. The look on which he gave scared me to completely pale. I felt as if my subconscious left my body. He pulled out his pocket knife and started to walk towards me. I turned around and slammed the door shut, using my foot as a wedge to stop him from coming in. I felt as if something left my body, my soul. Zach told me later on that I was unbelievably pale. The fight or flight instinct kicked in. We were in fear for our life. We heard him stab the door 3 times, and the marks on the door are there to prove it. We lock the door, and we go and grab rifles and prepare. We were truly scared for our lives. We wait 10 minutes, and later we suddenly hear Dylan say, and I quote, "Dylan is sleeping. It's safe to come out now." We waited there for at least 30 minutes until he knocked on the door, asking to come in as he was very scared. He sounded sincere, and so we let him in, and he suddenly asks why we're holding rifles, and we tell him. He was bewildered and had no idea. Whilst in Zach's room, I witnessed a dark, dark, dark mist arise from the ground and then suddenly shoot right towards Dylan, where he feels as if he's pushed back. None of us were comfortable there, so we went to my place, a 15-minute drive away. On the way back to my place, we felt it following us. So before Dylan came into the apartment, we decided to salt every entrance in the apartment, including windows. The second we stepped into the salted apartment, there was a huge sense of relief. It was like 110 pounds was lifted off our shoulders. We stayed there for a few hours before Dylan, the smart guy he is, decides to try and fight this demon himself. He walks into the unsalted hallway, where I saw the figure itself for the first time. It was 6'2" or so tall, dark and like a shadow. As the fight begins, he decides it's a great idea to try and antagonize the demon by taunting it. Where I watched it fly right past him, faster than any creature ever could. The second I see it fly by him, of course, Dylan sees it fly by and turns around, reinforcing my mind that what I was seeing wasn't imagination. As it flew by, it had a very dark feeling as always. After 10 minutes of doing this, he ends up getting possessed. He walked out of the secure building and stared at us from the ground through the balcony, with the same blank stare. He decides to try and re-enter the building where, from my guess, the demon was used to going right through doors, where Dylan runs full speed into the door, knocking him over, where he gets up and states, "You guys really threw me outside?" After that, we made him stay inside the apartment for a few days, making sure we were always with him. A few days later, he had finally gotten rid of it by strengthening his mental strength. We ended up trapping it in a room with a salt line, where we all stayed out of. After a few days, we removed the salt line and then never saw it again. Me and Zach, after this experience, went out, bought crosses, and got them blessed by a pastor. And to this day, we wear them 24/7, never taking them off. This story I'm about to share happened to my brother, sister, and myself back in the early 90s. I've decided to share this story because a recent family tragedy brought this experience to my mind, and I've been thinking about it a lot, so I've decided to share it. When I was a child, I grew up in a haunted house. I've had many terrifying experiences, but this is the topping of the cake, so to speak. I was 10 years old at the time. My two older sisters, Jessica, 12-year-old, and Deirdre, 14 years old. We had a foreign exchange student named Amy from Germany staying with us for 2 weeks at the time. She was very odd and quirky, but I came to enjoy her personality. I also must add, this will be important, that we had a dog named Cookie. He was a Shih Tzu Yorkie mix, and due to his size, we could never jump up on a couch. He would try and try until you finally picked him up and put him on the couch or chair, etc. I had never seen him be able to jump on our couch. This particular day, my parents both had to go into work at the same time and asked my older sister Deirdre to watch us kids for the afternoon. We were playing and goofing around for a while. Amy started to go through our parents' junk closet to see if there would be something to play with. She all of a sudden came out of the closet ecstatic, holding a tape recorder. She starts wanting to record funny things and then listen to it back. Sounded fun. We were all having fun making farting noises or burping. Stupid crap that kids think is funny. All of a sudden, Amy looks at us and says, "Let's make scary noises from the recorder." I was a little nervous since I knew we had scary things in our home, but I went with it. As we're making these recordings, out of nowhere, Amy stood up straight and stared down the main hallway that looked directly into my room. I began to notice she was pale, so pale that it made me think she looked like a ghost. We were all pulled and staring at her in confusion. All of a sudden, she brought up her right hand and covered her right eye. She put her hand down after a few seconds and then brought her left hand and covered her left eye. It was as if she didn't believe what she was seeing. I instantly felt the energy in the home become thick. It felt like a vacuum. This all happened in maybe 30 seconds. All of a sudden, Cookie ran towards my bedroom and was barking at the room. Then he whimpered and bolted down the hallway and jumped onto the couch. Right after that moment, we started to hear something run full force down the hall towards us. We couldn't see it, only hear it. We jumped on the couch and cuddled together, sobbing and terrified. We could hear it running down the hall towards us. As it reached us, we felt a massive wind go through us, and then the running would start over again, as if it was a repeated cycle. The evil energy was overwhelming and terrifying. We could feel the evil every time it ran through us. I've never felt that level of fear and terror in my entire life. This went on for about 15 or 20 minutes. The neighbour to our left, who was a priest, heard us screaming and came over to check out what was happening. As soon as he touched the doorknob, it instantly stopped. He came into us terrified and sobbing uncontrollably. He called my parents and they came home immediately. We never heard from Amy again after she left 3 days later. I've always wondered about her and the trauma she experienced staying with us and that effect. I hope she's okay now, after what she went through in our home. I'm currently 31 years old. I've been dealing with mental disability since I was in the 4th grade, but didn't end up in a psych ward until I was in 6th grade. So I've dealt with a lot of shit. So the worst experience I've ever had in a psych ward was when I was 17. I was the only guy admitted to that wing at that particular time. All of the other people were female, even the nurses. It wasn't the worst time I've spent there until my 3rd month. I had this insanely vivid dream of one of the nurses coming in to tell me they got a new patient, and she was a paranoid schizophrenic, and she was a lot like me. I woke up and looked through the other bed to see this black mass while on the bed staring at me. No distinguished face, but somehow had a gaping mouth. All it did was scream and cry. I ran out of my room in a cold panic, and all I saw was black walls covered in blood and guts. The floor was pulsating. As I stared in terror, I felt a hand on my shoulder. As I turned around, I heard a moan. It was the thing. It was holding me and crying. All I did was scream. When I came to, I was on the floor of the main room with all of the other patients standing above me, with the nurses holding me down. All of them had worried looks on their faces. The new girl was there. She looked like she already knew what I had seen. After a few days, I was informed of what I'd done. The nurse was showing the new girl around the wing and explained that I was the only male there, so we would be sharing the room. But they'd be watching us closely as it wasn't technically allowed for males and females to share a room. As they were talking, I sat up in my bed, looked directly at them and began to point and scream obscenities. Then I got up and began running around like a psychopath, swinging my arms and cursing. 2 security guards came to subdue me and ended up getting the crap beaten out of them. I broke one security guard's arm and the other's nose within 5 punches. Then I turned around and just screamed at the top of my lungs before collapsing. When I was refused to the psych ward, I was met with cold stares and terrified looks. The new girl and I sat together, and after a few minutes of silence, I asked if I had seen him. When she described what she was talking about, my heart dropped into my stomach. She had said she sees him every night, and all he does is scream and groan. She had tried to talk to him, but he never responded, only screamed and cried. Skip ahead a few weeks. Her and I had gotten to the point where our dreams were almost in sync. If I had a dream about him, so did she. One night, I actually heard a word from it. Lost. That was it. Lost. After this dream, he only appeared once more. It was my last night in the ward. I woke up and he was sitting at the edge of my bed. There was a new girl sitting up here looking at him. She looked at both of us and waved, and then he was gone. Since that night, I've never seen him again. I was discharged and kept in touch with the girl for 6 years afterwards. She was doing better and had not seen him again either. I've spent a good portion of my life dealing with medications and disorders and disabilities. This was one deciding instance that made me give up on meds. Whether it was the meds that did it or not, it was still my worst experience ever. And yes, I am a diagnosed schizophrenic, but it's almost impossible for 2 schizophrenics to experience the same thing like this. Whether you believe me or not is up to you, but please, if you have any explanation, I'd appreciate it. I work in concert visuals, so there are many things that could cause me to trip or fall. Most of the time in the warehouse, I'm very careful and watch where I step, but lately I've been hearing things that don't make sense. Most of my co-workers just joke about the warehouse being haunted. Things randomly fall or get tossed off shelves. Since I moved, they've been happening more though, even in my own home. I step on nails I've pounded into the ground numerous times. I hear scratching under my bed, or my things go missing. So here's where it gets really weird. In my work, we tend to have cable plugged in on a constant basis. We're always testing and fixing fixtures. I'm the only one who trips over the cables though. No matter how high I step to walk over it, I always get caught. Last week, I felt someone push me from behind and fell over a road case, but nobody was near me. I've had issues in the past with the paranormal, but never at work. At home, I feel like I'm constantly being watched or that I'm not alone. I hear giggling too, but it's never near me, it's always just out of reach. Or the footsteps in my attic. I thought it was a raccoon or an opossum, but the steps are too far apart and heavy. I hear heavy breathing around me when I'm not alone. I know this is written in an odd fashion, but it's the only way I can explain this. What should I do? No matter how careful I am or if I try to avoid a potential accident, it always happens. If I avoid a cable that's in my way, I still get tripped somehow. My furnace broke last week and the next day the same part broke. The guy working on it said he'd never seen it before. The igniter just cracked in half. Am I just overthinking it, or is it something trying to ruin me? Please help. I live in an extremely large subdivision. I'm the third owner of my home and no one has ever died there. My home is only 20 or so years old and I've been there for most of that time. The woman who owned it first only kept it for about 3 years, then my uncle and his wife for about 5, and then me. I tell you this so you understand that absolutely no one has died in this house. It's fairly new and should not have any ghosts. Everything started a few months after I moved in. My mother-in-law was the first one to experience anything. She was in our living room playing a game on the computer and I heard her yell at my son, who had been asleep for hours. I came out and asked her what's wrong, and she said she thought my son had run through and hit her on the back of the head. I checked on my son and he was passed out in his bed. She wouldn't drop it though. Someone had hit her in the head and she could have sworn and it had hurt. We were all on edge for a couple of days after that, but eventually things went back to normal. One night, I was sitting in my room watching TV. My cats were in the room with me, one curled at my feet and the other in the windowsill. The next thing I knew, I saw my cat. Well, the form of my cat as the curtain was in between him and I, lifting up. This is a rather large window. It goes very nearly from floor to ceiling, with an ornate fan window at the top. He went to just under the fan window, and like a bolt was thrown, there's no other way to describe it, into the wall across the room where he slid to the ground and lay perfectly still. I thought he was dead. By this time, my other cat had bolted out of the room, hissing and growling. I ran to his side and he was kind of shaking his head, like he'd been dazed, meowed at me and slunk away. My husband thought I was insane. He kept saying the cat must have jumped too hard and hit the wall, but my mother-in-law believed me. The next night, I stayed in the living room with her. Neither of us wanted to be alone for obvious reasons. She was playing her games, I was watching something on TV. My son was sleeping and my husband was in the man cave, otherwise known as the garage. I saw very clearly a little tow-headed child slip quickly into the kitchen, from the hall leading to the bedrooms. I also heard the man cave door open and knew my husband was coming out. So I said to my husband, "Tell your son to go back to bed." Now I must say that the garage is attached to the laundry room, which opens to the kitchen, so there was no way he would have missed our son. There are 3 ways into the kitchen, 1 from the laundry room and 2 opening out into the living room. There was no way either of us would have missed him slip by. My husband came to the kitchen and asked me where our son was. I told him he went into the kitchen. My husband had the most puzzled look on his face when he said there was no one in the kitchen. Mother-in-law said, "Sure, he's there. Look under the table." Meanwhile, I was going down to the bedroom and there was my son, sound asleep in his bed. As a parent, you can tell when your child is truly asleep. There are tiny clues you look for. This child was sprawled out like a rug on his bed, his kitten curled up asleep on his stomach, drool drying on his mouth. He hadn't been awake for some time. Still, my husband did not believe his mother and I. That is, until the next night. Mother-in-law and I had retreated to our rooms for the night. I don't think either of us wanted to stay up late. My brother was leaving his man cave and was startled by a full-blown man standing in our living room. This man was, as my husband put it, shielding his eyes and staring through the back wall of the living room. He didn't move nor make a sound. He was just standing there. My husband ran into our room and woke me up, apologising. There was something about our house. There was something there. The next day, after our son went to school, he called up a friend. They went through our home, blessing it with sage and eagle feathers. Then my husband went into each room and yelled into this was our home and no harm should come to us in our home. Whatever was there was welcome to stay, but could not come home any more. I've never been hurt. My son has never been hurt, and nothing bothered us or our animals again, physically. I'd be lying if I said whatever it was left. I still see the tow-headed child, albeit a lot clearer now. It seems things congregate there. I know that sounds strange, but I cannot explain it otherwise. My husband is now my ex-husband, and my mother-in-law passed away. I've remarried and have a daughter now. She sleeps in my mother-in-law's old room. When she was very small, she would tell me about the lady in her room. She'd sit on my daughter's bench and watch her fall asleep. I asked her if she was afraid of my daughter, and she said no. She keeps me safe. I feel I must address the lady in my daughter's room. She's not my ex-mother-in-law. She's been there for a long time. When my ex-husband and his mother moved out, my son moved into my mother-in-law's room because it was larger. I would sometimes hear him singing and talking to someone while he was playing in his room. Or at night, when I put him to bed. Honestly, with it just being he and I there, it was super freaky. My son was a bit older by this time, I think 8 or 9, so I didn't think it was the elusive imaginary friend most children have. I did end up asking him about it when I put him to bed and heard him chatting. He told me it was the lady in his room. She doesn't answer. She just sits there and keeps me safe. Okay, Spookosaurus Rex. As long as she isn't scaring you, then she can stay. Later, when my niece and nephew moved in, my nephew reported seeing her. Now he was 11 going on 12 and wasn't prone to flights of fancy. As far as I know, she's always been there. Mother-in-law died before I could ask her though, so I don't know if she ever saw her, but I don't think so. We were not shy when it came to telling each other our experiences. I'll never forget sitting her down on the couch that faced the hall to the bedroom, because I'd wanted someone else to see what I was seeing. I had been sitting there watching TV some weeks after the cat thing, when a flicker caught my eye. I looked down the hall and noticed the hall bath light was on. No big deal, little man must have left it on, or my ex. I walked down the hall and flip it off, shut the door and go back to my show. A short while later, another flicker catches my attention. Now the hall bath door is open and the light is on. A little freaked out, I stroll down the hall, flip the switch, shut the door hard and go back to the couch and watch the bathroom. Minutes tick by and I've just about convinced myself little man had gone to the bathroom when I see the door slowly start to open. I knew I had shut it tight. There was no reason for that door to move at all. I keep watching and flick. The light comes on. You can see the light switch from where I was sitting. It's on the wall that was facing the living room. I didn't see any hand. I can't say I saw the switch move because it was dark, but I was sure I would have been able to see a hand. At this point, the third time's the charm and I get the mother-in-law to sit on the couch. Walk to the bathroom, turn off the light, shut the door. This time giving it a push to ensure it was shut correctly. Walked back to the couch and waited. Sure thing, the door starts opening and I think mother-in-law is going to lose her mind as we both sit there watching as the light flicks on. Best to leave it like that then, was the ultimate consensus. I went back to my show and she to her game. This still happens, although now it's harder to pinpoint when it does because of the trove of people in my home. I almost never know if it was a forgetful teen or a spirit. I say almost because there are times when it's just me out in the living room and my new husband is at work and everyone else is fast asleep. You know, my mum has to have some time alone. Bathrooms are strange in my house. This first one takes place early to mid-80s. I was 9 or 10 years old. My brother was about 2 or 3. It was late at night, late for a preteen that is, in the big family farmhouse my dad and his 6 siblings grew up in after World War II. We were in our summer holidays, and every now and then I met some relatives I had no idea existed. So I wasn't too surprised when a late middle-aged man in a rough-hewn linen shirt and black frieze pants shook my hand in the middle of a large hallway. We had a chat. He was friendly in a gruff sort of way, asked questions, and nothing was strange or out of the ordinary. That's when my uncle, the eldest sibling and owner of the farm, walked into the hallway and went pale. The other man walked off into the sauna area. This is Finland. Most houses have saunas, either in them or attached. My uncle retreated into the kitchen at the end of the hall and couldn't get a word out for a while. As we sat in the open-plan dining area, he gathered his thoughts and told me, and later everyone, that the man was their father, who had died of a heart attack just down the same hall in 1960, aged 50. To this day, I don't know what to think of this incident, as there were 2 of us witnessing it. Nothing was odd about the man. I could feel his warm hand and firm handshake. We discussed the incident later on occasion, but my dad seemed incredulous, as he did not see it for himself. The uncle, though, was a changed man. That makes it slightly less likely to be imaginary. On the plus side, I think I got to meet my grandpa. On a side note, on the day that my uncle died, aged 75, the lights in my parents' living room kept going on and off. They couldn't find the reason. Less conclusive, but a comforting thought. The second experience connects to the earlier one. My dad, the skeptic, is the youngest and the last survivor of 7 siblings, 5 brothers and a pair of twin sisters. After the 3rd eldest brother had passed away in 1992, and already been buried and was looking up the doors at home, when he felt the need to glance out to the peephole, lo and behold, there was his recently deceased half-brother outside. Dad quickly banged the door shut and went to bed. Where in the middle of the night, he saw the brother standing at the foot of the bed. No contact was made. Dad was too scared. He didn't previously believe in the supernatural, and he still has some trouble with it, but that experience opened his horizons quite a bit. Mum has always been a strong believer, so he felt he could tell her, and they told us together later on. We were still living with them at the time, but it took them days to talk about it. I found both the event and the idea comforting. Dad, not so much. I was about 17 years old when I experienced my first encounter with a hooded figure that still leaves me perplexed, almost 13 years later. It was the summer of 2006. My family was moving a lot due to financial troubles. At this point in my life, I was going through emotions from depression and my first love. I would usually stay up rather late compared to other members of my family, and would usually crash around 4 a.m. I'm a firm believer in the witching hour, aka 3 o'clock in the morning. Over the years, I've felt the uneasiness that can come with that groaning time of night. Feelings of being watched, hearing strange sounds, or the horror of the deafening silence. This night was no different. From my room, I can see the kitchen. Only feet away and through a small hallway, I can see the kitchen table and a few cupboards. My bed, 6 to 8 feet from my door, lay parallel to the doorway. I stayed up late again, as usual. Growing tired, I turned out my line and lay down in my bed. I cannot recall how long I had actually fallen asleep, and to be honest, it was so long ago, I can't remember if I had even fallen asleep by that point, but something came over me, an uneasiness. The strange silence in the night caused me to turn over onto my left side, now facing the doorway. That was when I saw the hooded figure. What started out as a mere shadow or fade in the night began to take shape before my eyes. Sitting at the kitchen table was this dark, clothed figure. The area where her face would have been was glowing. Not too bright, but just enough to accentuate the hood and robe. It sat there, just staring at me, or at least that's what I thought it was doing. It never moved. The oddest thing though, I wasn't scared. I simply felt okay. I was definitely intrigued and puzzled, so much I couldn't look away. For what felt like eternity, we were locked in on each other. Then I fell asleep. To this day, I don't know what it was that I saw that night, nor why I wasn't scared of this being. It seemed so odd that I was just okay with this thing sitting and looking at me, that I just simply closed my eyes and went to sleep. I haven't ever really told anyone about what happened, and I've searched online for some similar experiences with other people, with no luck. I was getting ready for work and my daughter was asleep on the bed as I did so. She's 20 months old. All of a sudden, her toy bus started honking and the music started to play. There weren't any toys on top of it on her toy box. It kept glitching, like 2 honks when it's 7, and saying words like it's trying to form a sentence. Batteries are pretty new. I got home from work. My brother was babysitting while I was gone and said something had happened. He goes, her toy bus kept honking and talking. Also, her ball slide toy kept playing sounds. I told him that can't be, as I've had it turned off for the last month, and I took the batteries out. There's a switch you'd have to move to make it turn on. He double checked, and the batteries were back in there. He also mentioned that my daughter says Papa and her eyes follow something in our room. She's never been able to meet her grandpa. Our father passed away almost 4 years ago, and we think it's him trying to say hi, but we aren't questioning it, and not messing with anything to find out, as we've both had our share of paranormal experiences and hauntings in the past. Anyone else's child's toys do this? Has anyone had their toddlers see things? So let me start off by saying that I've had an immense amount of paranormal experiences in my life, from age 15 to present day. My brother has also had things happen where he's lived, and now we live together and are experiencing things again. Firstly, my daughter has this play and is learning a girl pup toy. You can press its ears, paws, and the heart on its chest, and it will play various songs and phrases. Well, she was in her crib the other day while I was cleaning, and she was playing with her toys and books, and the pup was in the corner of her crib away from her, and it started singing. I was like, okay, she must have pressed the paw that plays Happy and You Know It. To play another song, you have to press one of the other paws or ears. It kept playing different songs and looping. It kept talking. I could hear her down the hallway and went to check on her. She was on the other side of the crib, about a foot away from it, and she rarely played with it. It still continued to sing for another 5 minutes without touching it, and it had new batteries. So, creepy, right? Yesterday, my daughter, 16 months, was playing in the living room with my brother and his fiancée. We have this large, Sterilite container that holds all of our candles for our home business. My brother saw it get pushed and fall over. He had to clean up the glass right after a few candles had got broken. It's 10:33 p.m. here in Orlando, and about 5 minutes ago, we had my brother's Gundam, I don't know how to spell it, figurines fall off the bookshelf along with some photos of him and his fiancée, and a light-up block that has a photo on it. One figurine had a missing head that you literally would have to rip off to remove it, and it was gone. We set everything back on the bookshelf, and we're just watching TV. We did a few EVPs in our dining room last night and had quite a bit of activity. My brother asked how old a spirit was, and right after we said it, you heard a female voice say, 15. We've always had very clear EVPs in the past, and we're going to try to capture some tonight. Wish us luck. This all happened at the same house, which was a 100-year-old farmhouse that was also part of the Underground Railroad. We no longer live there. The house isn't there anymore. It's a very expensive neighbourhood. My parents said that they were sitting on our couch and watching TV. The fireplace shutter opened and closed several times on their own. My mum was sitting in the same living room. Towards her front was a large wooden deck that had a fireplace in the centre and 2 large windows on either side. To the right was a concrete porch that ran the length of that side of the house. It had a door off to the side and had several large windows on it as well. To her back was a bedroom that us kids shared in the winter because it was easier to heat half the house. To her left was the blue room. The whole thing was blue, but it was just a central room where our computer happened to be and had access to the basement. Anyways, on the wooden deck, my mom saw a black figure that was as tall as a bear, but too thin to be human. She said that she looked at it and had a feeling that it was watching her. It wasn't completely dark outside, but it was on its way. The figure then started doing laps around the house. It would pass the windows in front of her every few seconds. This was a 2,500-ish square foot farmhouse. It was incredibly fast. We had a small family farm. Chickens, goats, pigs, quail, turkey, ducks, etc. Nothing big. We had about 30 chickens at the time. Living that far out in the country, we always set up traps by the coop to catch opossums and raccoons. Anything that ate chickens. Well, we go outside one day to see piles of feathers throughout the yard around the coop. Every single pile had a head on top of it. 30-ish piles, and that many heads. No puddles of blood, no insides anywhere, just piles of feather and heads. Shortly after this, my dad, sometimes myself as well, would go out at night with a shotgun to see if we could find anything. We had gotten more chickens and nothing unusual in the traps. Just cages. My dad was a manly man. Wasn't scared of anything. I've seen him move a tree by himself out of the road that 4 grown men weren't able to get together. He's tough, to say the least. So he goes out, like he usually does. Our kitchen coop sits about 50-ish feet in front of our garage. It was really just a 1,000 square foot ranch outbuilding. We just called it the garage. So we hear 5 blasts or so from the shotgun, and very shortly after, my dad comes through the front door with tears running down his face. He's visibly shaking. After he calms down a bit, he explains that while in front of the garage, he heard a real guttural growl coming from the tree line, right behind and above the garage. He said it wasn't like anything he had ever heard in his life. And he was an avid hunter growing up. He's heard and probably eaten just about any animal that Indiana has to offer. He said it was low and demonic. He said he could just feel that it was evil. He immediately unloaded the shotgun and ran to the house. I don't like to talk about this one much, but it's relevant. I would hear voices in that house. One night, I woke up my parents crying to let them know that the devil wanted my soul and wouldn't stop trying to get me to give it to him. I don't remember much about it because this was about 5th grade and I'm 31 now. I've since been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. I could see where it might have just been my anxiety, but I definitely remember sitting on the living room floor, sobbing at like 3 a.m, just begging for the voices to stop. I haven't had anything else happen at all similar to this ever happen. My parents found a tunnel in our basement that we assumed was part of the Underground Railroad. My cousin was over at the time and asked if he could explore it. It was covered up, about shoulder high to an adult, and an adult could crawl through with not a whole lot of extra room. He had a flashlight and was gone for about half an hour. We were starting to get very worried when he could see the light again. He came back and said that there had not been an end in sight. She was getting nervous having crawled so far. He was probably 16-ish. We always had dogs and we could find our dogs in front of our house just dead. No wounds, prior symptoms, just dead. Sometimes 3 at a time. We found out after we moved that there was a practicing coven that met not far from our house. We heard that a lot of dead animal remains had been found. A decent amount of years later, I went with my sister to Chicago. Her fiancé had graduated from boot camp and was going to A school. I'm not a military guy, so I'm sorry if I word any of this incorrectly. I'm just ignorant to it all. They do a ceremony for the family with their group flags and such. They hang out for a bit and then leave for A school. On the way home, I was asleep in the car and my sister had gotten lost. I shot about asleep and told my sister to pull over the car. She did, and I told her to wait her turn. She asked what's wrong, and I said that I woke up because we were by our old house. I could feel it. She made a turn and we passed the front gates of a cemetery that was right by the house. Had she kept on in that direction, she would have passed right by it. What was at the start of all of this was a dream that my sister had. I think we had some dogs die before this point, but we didn't find out about the coven until several years after we moved. I didn't find out about the dream until I was probably in high school. Anyways, surrounding the end of the property there was a tree line that separated where the coven met and our house. My sister said that in her dreams there were monsters tearing down the tree line, and that she knew if they tore it down that they were coming for me. Like me. Not my sister or any of the other 5 people in my family. Me specifically. Well, not long after, in preparation of turning the property into a subdivision, they tore down the tree line. All of a sudden, stuff happened. My parents decided one day that we were moving. We rented. And we had a house purchased on contract and were completely moved out in 2 weeks' time. I remembered this one late and am fully aware that this is the hardest story to believe. In my opinion, at least. This is definitely an event that's the foggiest in my memory because I didn't really get it. So I was in Boy Scouts and it was the time of year for popcorn. I sold enough popcorn to be one of the top in the state. That's what my parents told me at least. I just knocked on doors and pushed the popcorn. Anyways, my parents had just loaded up the van with all of the popcorn we were going to deliver the following morning. It was an old brown/tan Astro van. The ones with the weird curtain in the windows. This thing was completely stuffed with popcorn. We all go to sleep and I remember being outside with my family looking at our van on fire. The fire department came and everything. This thing burnt completely. Well, my dad had a Polaroid camera and took a picture. My dad takes the picture with him to show people because it's a crazy story. My dad is showing a guy the picture and the dude asks him if he sees the face. My dad looks at the picture and sees the face. It's kind of summarised because I don't want to make up details that I don't remember. Things started to appear in the picture. Like in the flames. It started with a face that turned into a demonic looking Grim Reaper figure. The sky then all. The people started to notice more things as my dad showed it to more people. My dad would hand the picture and say, "What do you see?" Everyone saw it. Then, people noticed that the Reaper figure was holding a chain that was attached to a torn apart dog. And finally, a burning cross behind it. As soon as people started seeing that, my dad stuffed the picture in a Bible. It was one of the Bibles with a built-in zipper. He didn't tell any of us about him stuffing it in a Bible until after we moved. He pulls out the Bible while we're moving and the picture is gone. If I remember right, he freaked the hell out. I remember my dad always handing the picture to people and then being all creeped out. I remember seeing the fire. I saw the picture once right after it had been taken, and I remember playing on the burnt up van because it was the late 90s and we were kids. The rest of it is what my parents have talked about. My dad was a server at the same restaurant for about 25 years, so he showed it to a ton of people. This wasn't just a few buddies, he literally started handling it to his customers. Everyone saw it, and everyone started to see more things as he showed more people. So quite a few years back, I had met one of my now really good friends on the internet. I'm in Alabama, and she's in Washington State. During some of the first few months of our friendship, we started discussing paranormal things and whether we believed in them or not. We were young teens, around 15 or so if I remember correctly. Being that age, we hardly took anything seriously, so we brought up the topic of Robert the Doll, discussed his origins, and then started poking fun at him. We'd made remarks about it being comical seeing him run around through the windows, if you were a neighbour. How scared we'd be even if he was locked in the attic. I believe that's where they said he was put one time. It's been a really long time since I've researched him, but he was a fresh study in my mind at the time. And how his footsteps would have thrown us into sheer panic. However, as teens do, we kept laughing about him and making comments about how much we'd stop him if he haunted us and such. All of a sudden, my phone started messing up. We were texting all of this back and forth, and my screen started blacking out her texts. Right as I was typing my text to tell her I wasn't able to see her messages, a message from her actually came through, saying that her phone was messing up. I cannot remember what her phone did, but I do know we were very frightened and immediately apologised to Robert. It honestly seems crazy, him being in Florida and us being in two completely different states. But to this day, and according to her every 6 months when I bring it up again, I really feel like Robert didn't take too kindly to our teenage stupidity and interfered with our phones at the same time as a warning to stop. And we did. This happened to me about 10 years ago, but still sticks with me to this day. I was around 15 years old, and my mum and dad decided we would take a trip to my aunt and uncle's new house they had just bought in Gridley, Illinois, to stay for a few days. We lived in central Indiana, so it was about a 3.5-hour drive to get there. The house was an old farmhouse, probably built in the early to mid-1900s, and sat very isolated, basically in the middle of a cornfield. I have a very large family, and a few more of my mum's siblings travelled to the house as well, so they were going to have a big party. My uncle, who owns the house, has a son about a year or two younger than me. We'll call him Steve. So my cousin Steve and I had been hanging out all night playing video games, spending time with our families, etc. Everyone was up fairly late, and as people started going to bed and the party was dying down, Steve and I decided to go to his room and crash for the night. Steve has a pretty small bedroom, I'd say about 10 by 10, but he did have bunk beds, so there was plenty of room for both of us to sleep in there. He normally slept on the bottom bunk, so I climbed up to lay down for the night. As I did basically every night, I would pull out my phone and check my MySpace or Facebook, whatever I was using at the time. I can't remember if MySpace was dead by then. So after laying there for about 5 minutes, Steve gets out of bed and said he needs to go use the restroom. The head of the bed is right next to the door, so I look down and watch him leave the room and shut the door behind him. His room was basically pitch black dark, but there was some light in the hallway, so I clearly saw him leave. So at this point, I'm laying on the top bunk in his room by myself, in basically pitch black darkness, besides the light from my cell phone. He was gone for maybe a minute, when all of a sudden the bunk bed started slamming into the wall behind me, like there was someone at the foot of the bed, rocking the bunk bed back to the wall. As it's slamming into the wall, my first thought was maybe one of Stevie's older brothers is playing a prank or something, so I say, cut it out, that's not funny. The bed continues to slam into the wall. It did it probably 10 times total, probably once every second or two. I wait for it to stop and hop down off the top bunk to turn on the lights, expecting someone to be standing at the end of the bed and laughing at me. I turned on the lights and nothing. Nobody is in the room. Just me. Like I said, it was a very small room and I made sure to check everywhere. Under the bed, in his closet. I was the only person in the room. At this point I'm just completely terrified and I'm trying to rationalise what just happened. I decided maybe the bed is just rickety and I was rocking it somehow. I go to the foot of the bed and try to recreate what just happened to me. Not happening. This bed is one of those old metal bunk beds, bolted together, and it wasn't budging. The only way to get the bed to move the way it did would be to slide the entire bed back into the wall and then slide it back. This thing was on carpet as well, so it wasn't moving. I tried with all of my strength to mimic what I felt, and it just wasn't happening. At this point, I'm in total panic mode. I run out of the room down the hallway to the bathroom and asked my cousin what the hell he was doing, and he told me he had to poop. I asked him if he was just in the room fucking with me, and he asked what I was talking about, and I explained what happened. And once he was out of the bathroom, we went back to his room and talked about it. He said him and his family have almost all experienced some kind of paranormal happening since they moved into the house. Safe to say that that night, I didn't sleep in his room. I went and slept on the floor next to the bed where my parents were sleeping. This is the only time in my life I've ever experienced anything paranormal. This happened to me when I was in high school. I was at my friend's house at the time who lived in an apartment building. She had a neighbour who lived upstairs and was a few years younger than us, who we hung out with when I visited my friend's apartment. On this specific day, my friend's neighbour mentioned that she had a Ouija board and asked if we wanted to use it with her. We both agreed, as I personally didn't think Ouija boards were actually paranormal. I thought it was a myth. We went into a garage area of the apartment building and put our fingers on the planchette. For the first 3 hours, nothing really eventful happened. Eventually, we had movement on the planchette and started asking questions to this spirit, who would answer us. I forgot who, but someone asked if the spirit was trying to communicate with any of us. Interestingly enough, it spelled out my name. I was skeptical and thought it was one of my friends messing with me, so I asked what its name was. Then spelled out my grandmother's name, who died 6 months before this Ouija board encounter. I started getting a little uncomfortable, as my grandmother's name is in another language, and my friends did not know this language, nor have I ever told them what her name was. They wouldn't even know how to spell it either. Weirded out, I asked what my grandmother wanted. She started spelling out "gur," and then the planchette started going in weird circles, and even going off of the board, and was not spelling out anything that made sense. So I asked for further clarification, and then just said, "You are great. This will be important later, so keep this in mind." Anyway, I just thought it was just us moving it weirdly, and then said goodbye. A few days later, my grandmother's husband, my grandfather, suddenly passed away. It was unexpected, as he was in great health and was right before Christmas, and was so excited for Christmas. As I was at his funeral, I remembered sitting there and thinking about the Ouija board, and that's just when it hit me. When the Ouija board or my grandmother initially tried to spell out something that started with GR, I realised that grandfather starts with GR. But then the planchette moves around weirdly when my grandmother couldn't spell out the rest of the word, as if something was stopping my grandmother from completing the word and warning me. The next few months were hell, as I started blaming myself and was convinced that I somehow contributed to my grandfather's death by using the board. It's got to the point that I became suicidal, and the scary part is, my thoughts felt as if it wasn't me. It felt as if something was trying to lead me to taking my life, as they were very dark. I can't explain it, as it might have been guilt, but I felt like something was watching me all the time, and I felt a strange presence in the next few months after using the board. There's also the fact that the night of when I used the Ouija board, I was in the bathroom and I was underneath some lights. I had a strange feeling and felt that I needed to walk away. Right when I did, the light shattered and would have injured me if I was standing underneath. I eventually confessed to my mother about the Ouija board experience, and right when I did, I felt a giant weight off of my shoulders. The negative and dark thoughts were slowly disappearing, and I started to not feel the dark presence anymore when I overcame these thoughts. However, I was still wondering if the spirits I contacted was even my grandmother. I also wondered if I was imagining the dark presence and the dark thoughts I had. Fast forward, I was at an overnight event at my school, and another friend brought a Ouija board. I decided to use it one more time with this friend and find some answers. At one point, the Ouija board said it was trying to contact me specifically. When we asked who it was, it then started spelling out Dev. We started panicking, but then it spelled out a word that I forgot. I dismissed it and thought it was nothing, but my friend decided to look up the word. A few weeks later, she told me that the word meant devil in another language. It was then it was confirmed to me that it might not have been my grandmother who was contacting me the first time. There's also the fact that there may have been something that was trying to get to me, and it didn't have good intentions. To this day, I'm convinced that the spirits only tried to warn me about my grandfather, so that when he passed I would have felt guilty-free. By feeling guilty, I was more vulnerable to the spirits' influences, to the point that I would almost take my life. I do not know if this actually happened, but it's the only logical explanation I have. My husband and I had a miscarriage at 10 weeks, in between our two daughters, aged 3 and 1.5. This pregnancy was a surprise, and I didn't figure out I was pregnant until I was about 9 weeks. I made an appointment with my doctor, who saw me right at 10 weeks and got an ultrasound, and the genetic testing done through blood work. Only 2 days after the doctor visit, I began to bleed and was told I was having a miscarriage. My eldest daughter was about to turn 1 at this time, so we hadn't gone through the motions of explaining to her that she was going to have a sibling yet. She had no idea, and still to this day they didn't know I was ever pregnant with that baby. I became pregnant with her sister 3 months later. The doctor called me about my lab work a couple of weeks later and said that everything had been fine. There was no genetic reason as to why we'd lost the baby, and that I would get a copy of my full lab results in the mail. I got the results but didn't open them and shoved them into my glove box. Fast forward about almost 2 years, and I finally opened these test results. They revealed that I had been pregnant with a little boy. I cried new tears knowing that I had lost a son, especially seeing as I'm not able to have any more children, and having a boy isn't something in store for our family. I told my husband, we cried and came to terms with it all over again. We moved into a new house, and since then, my oldest daughter's been acting a little odd. At first I would hear her talking to herself, or so I thought, in her room. I just assumed she was playing pretend and never thought to ask her. One day I did, because it was time for bed and she was talking very quietly. Her little sister was already asleep, so I poked my head in and said, "Baby, who are you talking to?" She looked up at me and said, "Ollie." When I asked her who Ollie was, she said, "My brother." My heart leapt into my throat. We had had the name Oliver picked out for a boy, Ollie for short. Since then, every day, she tells me she's talked to her brother. When I ask her what her brother is, she tells me he's a ghost, but he plays with her. Then today, probably just by coincidence, my 1.5-year-old said Bubba and pointed over to where my 3-year-old was, playing by herself. When I was travelling in Ladakh many years ago, my boyfriend and I spent a week staying in a room above the tea shop in a tiny village on the road to Kargil to Leh. The village had a tea shop, a gompa with a few resident monks, a herd of goats, and that was about it. But we'd been travelling a few months by that stage, and it felt a good place for us to haul up our feet. Anyhow, our first morning there, we were abruptly woken by a young monk knocking at our door who announced, in very limited English, and a lot of hand gestures, that he had come to take me on a tour of the gompa. I hadn't met this monk before, but despite the language barrier, immediately felt comfortable with him, and although it was a bit odd at first, as despite my boyfriend tagging along with us, the monk's focus was clearly on me. To cut a long story short, we spent much of that week in his company and got to know him well. Although in private, my boyfriend would jokingly refer to him as my suitor. There was never any creepiness, and we both felt the monk's obvious devotion to me was more in the way of an old and dear friend who hadn't seen me for years, and who was clearly very excited to see me again. Anyhow, after a week, we decided to say our goodbyes and continue on to Leh. After a month or so in Leh and exploring the surrounding countryside, we eventually decided it was time to head back down to India, and so caught the bus. When our bus made a quick stop in the monk's village, we didn't have time to get off the bus, but the young monk suddenly appeared at my window and grabbed hold of my hand. He quickly told me not to worry and that he would see me again. And when I tried to explain that he wouldn't because we were now on our way back to India and would be returning to Europe from there, he shook his head, gave me the most beautiful smile, laughed and said, No, I see you again other time." And as he ran beside the bus, holding my hand for as long as he could, I realised that he meant he would see me in another life, and felt a sudden rush of emotions. After a while, I forgot all about the young monk, and it wasn't until nearly 20 years later, after my son was born, and I suddenly remembered him again and what he'd said. When my son was born, I'd looked into his eyes. I instantly felt as though I remembered him, which I hadn't with my other children. And not long after, when I began to take him out and about, people began commenting that he was an old soul. And when I asked them what they meant, that he'd been here before. And there were relatively normal mums and dads at play centre and school who weren't commenting that about other people's babies. But I let it pass, thinking it was just one of those silly things people say. But as the months passed, although he was very advanced physically, he started walking just before 6 months, and by 8 months was climbing every gate, ladder and tree he could get his little hands on. His speech didn't develop normally. He spoke Pidgin English very hesitantly, as though learning a second language, but spoke a different language very rapidly, whose delivery style reminded me of the Tibetan-based language spoken in Ladakh. We presumed and told people it was just a speech delay, but every time he spoke, I couldn't help but be reminded of the young monk and what he had said about how he would see me again another time. By the time he was 4, English had replaced his other language, and now 11, he has no memory of his other language. But as he grew, he also started to display certain character traits I remembered as belonging to the young monk. A very particular sense of humour, a love of sugar, an interest in the planets and stars, gestures, postures and facial expressions I remember as belonging to the monk, etc., and which my other children don't share. Anyhow, although I'd love to believe in reincarnation, and I've read a number of accounts which seem to confirm reincarnation, or at the very least, a well of past life knowledge we can dip into, I've never been able to rationalise how reincarnation would work at a universal level, and so still sit on the fence where reincarnation is concerned. Having said that, I still wonder about my son and the young monk from Ladakh. Thoughts or similar accounts where you think maybe reincarnation, but not sure? Norwich is an old medieval city in England and has lots of beautiful and interesting old places to visit. One of its most famous buildings is the towering Norwich Cathedral, opposite Tomland, which sits down by the River Wensum. Anyhow, busy exploring my new city one Saturday, I visited the cathedral and after wandering the building, decided to explore the cathedral close. It was a late sunny afternoon in October, with lots of autumn leaves on the ground, and I was really enjoying my walk when I stumbled upon a cobbled alley at the end of some houses, and decided to see where it led. The floor and walls were cobbled, and the walls were maybe 10 foot high, so that I couldn't see over them, but at first could hear people in their gardens on the other side talking and children playing, and so, although I was on my own in the alleyway, I didn't feel alone. But as I walked on, the alley began to twist and turn, and although the sky was blue overhead and the sun still out, I began to feel increasingly uneasy. I could no longer hear voices coming from the other side of the walls, and when I thought about it, realised that in fact I couldn't hear anything. No birds, no traffic, not even wind, and yet the cathedral is in the middle of a reasonably sized city. I began to feel nervous, and my scalp started to prick, and so I picked up my pace, telling myself that I'd been walking a while, and that the alleyway couldn't go on forever. But as I turned each blind bend, hoping to see the end of what was beginning to feel like a maze, I was only met with another stretch of alleyway. I began to jog, and although I hadn't seen anyone since entering the alley, and couldn't hear any footsteps on the cobbles behind me, I had the growing sensation that someone or something bad was following me close behind, and that the walls were pressing in. I started having difficulty breathing and realised I was also beginning to feel dizzy. I didn't want to pass out alone in this alleyway, and so decided to run. After what seemed like forever, I turned another corner and suddenly sprinted out into a perfectly normal-looking street down by the river, and the city sounds returned. I realised I was shaking, my hands and forehead dripping with sweat, and I didn't have a clue where I was. I sat down on a wall and had a cigarette, and pulled myself together, and then stopped a passerby and asked for directions back to the market square in the middle of town, from where I could find my own way back to campus. It didn't take long to walk back to the market square, but when I checked my watch, it turned out I'd been in the alley for nearly an hour. It didn't make any sense, as I couldn't have walked that far, but I didn't want to think too much about it, and so told myself that maybe all the twists and turns the alley had made had added to the time. At class on Monday, I was telling a few people about the alleyway in the cathedral grounds, and how it had suddenly turned really spooky, when one of the mature students on our course, who'd lived in Norwich for years and knew a lot about its history, overheard me. She asked me if it was an alley. It was an old cobbled one with high walls that led off the cathedral close, and I said yes. She took me aside and quietly explained to me that she wasn't surprised I'd felt what I did, because that was the alleyway they dragged people accused of witchcraft along before burning them at the stake. Norwich has a huge history with witches. But the kicker to this story is that, though I lived in Norwich for a number of years and often visited the cathedral, I never walked that alleyway again because of what had happened the afternoon, until one day when a friend from overseas was visiting. I took her down to the cathedral and while there, told her about the alleyway and what I'd experienced. She insisted that we walk it, and when I stalled and started to make excuses, promised me that if things started to go bad, we'd just turn back, and she would stay with me at all times. Reluctantly, I agreed. The alleyway was just how I remembered it at first. Dry cobbled floor and high cobbled walls backing onto people's gardens. But after perhaps 10 minutes at most and only a handful of turns, suddenly we found ourselves back out on the street. It didn't make any sense to me back then, and still doesn't to this day.